The real-life horror story began on November 13, 1974, when a 23-year-old man named Ronald DeFeo Jr. fatally shot his parents and his 4 younger siblings while they were asleep in their home in Amityville, New York. DeFeo initially claimed to the police that the murders had likely been a mob hit, and his act was apparently so convincing that he was taken to a local station for protection. But it didn't take long for cracks to form in his story, and by the next day, he had already confessed to killing his family himself. On the outside, the DeFeos appeared to live happy lives on Long Island during the early 1970s. According to the New York Times, one of their neighbors described them as a nice, normal family. They lived in an affluent part of Long Island called Amityville. Their Dutch colonial home had a swimming pool and a nearby boat dock. Inside the house, there were life-sized portraits of the family hung on the walls. But the DeFeos were a very different family behind closed doors. Ronald DeFeo Sr. managed an auto dealership, a job that certainly couldn't support the family's lavish lifestyle. Instead, much of their money came from Louise's father, Michael Briganti, who purchased the family's home for them, allowing them to move out of their small Brooklyn apartment. Briganti later gave his son-in-law about $50,000 to have the family portraits painted. So, for all of the wealth and luxury that Ronald Big Ronnie DeFeo Sr. showed off, he had, in truth, earned very little of it himself. Big Ronnie was also reportedly an abusive and violent man. Most often, he took his anger and frustration out on his eldest child, Ronald DeFeo Jr., who usually went by Butch. And as Butch grew up, he struggled to find any common ground with his father. Butch was also bullied at school for being overweight, with kids calling him names like Porkchop and the Blob. By his teenage years, he had lost most of that weight through his use of amphetamines, which he had come to rely on, along with alcohol, as a coping mechanism. He and his father continued to fight frequently. Butch once pulled a gun on Ronald Sr., and although Butch was technically employed at his family's dealership, he rarely showed up to work and left early when he did. In general, he spent most of his time doing drugs or drinking, getting into fights, and arguing with his parents. Still, no one expected that Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s troubles would lead him to commit the Amityville murders. Butch's ongoing conflict with his father came to a violent head when he fatally shot Ronald DeFeo Sr. with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle as he slept during the early hours of November 13, 1974. But of course, he didn't just kill his father. He also turned the gun on his mother, Louise DeFeo. Then, 23-year-old Butch went into the bedrooms where his siblings were sleeping and murdered 18-year-old Dawn, 13-year-old Allison, 12-year-old Mark, and 9-year-old John Matthew with the same weapon. After killing his family, Butch took a shower, got dressed, and collected incriminating evidence. On his way to work, he threw the evidence, including the gun, into a storm drain. Then, he went about his day. As the day went on, he decided to leave work and spend the afternoon with his friends, making sure to mention to all of them that he couldn't get in touch with his family for some reason. Then, he prepared for the discovery of his family's bodies. In the early evening, Butch ran to a nearby bar, screaming for help, according to the New York Daily News. He told the patrons there that someone had shot his family and begged them to come back with him to his house. There, the shocked bargoers were greeted by a truly horrific scene. Each member of the DeFeo family was found lying face down in bed, with fatal bullet wounds. Ronald DeFeo Sr. and Louise DeFeo had both been shot twice, and their children had been shot 1 time each. Police arrived at the scene and found an in-shock Ronald DeFeo Jr. waiting for them. DeFeo initially claimed to the authorities that he believed his family had been targeted by the mob. At first, it seemed like the cops might buy his story. They even took him to a police station for his protection. But they soon noticed details that didn't line up. For example, DeFeo maintained that he had been at work all morning and with friends all afternoon. Therefore, he couldn't have killed his family. But police quickly determined that the bodies had been shot sometime in the early morning, well before DeFeo would have gone to work. DeFeo's criminal trial in October 1975 captured attention for 2 reasons: the sheer brutality of his crime and the unusual details surrounding the defense. His lawyer built a case claiming that he was an insane man who killed his family in self-defense because of the demonic voices in his head. Ultimately, DeFeo was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder in November. He would later be sentenced to 6 consecutive sentences of 25 years to life in prison. But the story of the Amityville murders was not over. For one thing, there were still mysteries surrounding the case. Authorities had no idea how all 6 victims had died in their sleep without a struggle. Another thing that puzzled them was that none of the neighbors had heard gunshots, despite the fact that DeFeo did not use a gun silencer. Though DeFeo claimed to have drugged his family's dinner, experts noted that a long time had passed between the meal and the family's deaths. Perhaps most chillingly, the killer's motive remained uncertain. Though it's clear that DeFeo had many issues with his father, it baffled many that he would go after the rest of his family members, especially his youngest siblings. And considering the fact that DeFeo would change his story multiple times in prison, he shed very little light on the haunting mystery. And then, in December 1975, a new family moved into the DeFeo's old home. George Lutz, his wife Kathy, and their 3 children stayed at the residence for just 28 days before fleeing the property in terror, claiming that the house was haunted by the spirits of the deceased DeFeos. From green slime reportedly oozing from the walls to windows suddenly shattering to family members allegedly levitating in bed, their claims sounded like something straight out of a horror film. DeFeo made multiple attempts to free himself, growing increasingly resentful of the attention he received in prison. He changed the story of what happened during the Amityville murders multiple times, at certain points claiming that his mother or sister had committed some of the killings. He remained in prison until the day he died at age 69 in 2021. "I guess the Amityville horror really is supposed to be me," DeFeo once said. "Because I'm the one that got convicted of killing my family. I'm the one they say who did it, I'm the one that's supposed to be possessed by the devil."